the 1800s, workers tearing down the wall of an old Italian convent found something that made them drop their tools. A small chamber, no door, no window, just a narrow gap sealed shut for who knows how long. Inside, a human skeleton, a woman still seated upright against the stone, as if she'd simply stayed there. Her fingers were still curled around a rosary. No record of her name survived. No record of why she was sealed inside that wall, alive, left to die in total darkness with only her prayers for company. But here's the question that should chill you. She wasn't the only one. Across Europe, convents were quietly used by powerful families for centuries, not as houses of God, but as places to make daughters disappear. Some, like the woman behind that wall, never came out at all, and one of them, sent away at just 11 years old, survived long enough to write down exactly what was being done and why. The church tried to make sure no one ever read it. By the end of this video, you'll know her name, and you'll understand why what happened to her was happening to thousands of women just like her in convents across Italy at the exact same time. Using advanced AI techniques, we've taken the original engravings, portraits, and convent records from this era and transformed them into vivid, lifelike scenes. So today, you won't just hear what happened behind those walls, you'll see it. And if you want to know what other secrets were hidden behind locked doors like this one, including the chamber where Ottoman princes were sealed away for decades, a secret even the sultans were afraid to speak of, make sure you're subscribed, because that video is coming next, and it's even darker than this one. Now, let's go back to that door, because in 1615, in Venice, one of those doors was about to close on an 11-year-old girl. To understand why Elena's father did what he did, you have to understand what it cost to have daughters in 17th century Venice. Picture the Tarabotti household, 11 children, 6 of them daughters. Stefano Tarabotti, a glass trade merchant, sits at his table with a ledger open in front of him, and the numbers don't add up. In Venice, when a daughter married, her family had to pay a dowry, and not a small one. For a noble or merchant family, a single daughter's dowry could cost more than a house. Now imagine 6 daughters. There was a saying in Venice at the time, aut muros, aut maritus, either the wall or the husband. For Elena, the choice had already been made before she could speak for herself. She was born with a limp. In a society where a woman's worth was measured by her usefulness on the marriage market, a disabled daughter was to her father a financial problem with only one acceptable solution. Here's the detail that should stop you cold. Elena was 11 years old when she was sent to the convent of Sant'Anna, not as a punishment for anything she'd done, not because she'd chosen a religious life. She was sent away because of the shape of her leg. And she was not alone. Across Italy, in convents from Florence to Naples to Venice, thousands of girls were living the same story. Daughters who were too plain, too poor, too disabled, too unwanted to be worth a dowry. The convent didn't call this a punishment. The church had a softer word for it: monachization. It sounds gentle, almost spiritual, but ask the women living behind those walls what it actually meant, and you'll get a very different answer. And remember that sealed chamber from the start of this video? The skeleton with the rosary hidden behind solid stone. Keep that image in mind, because the deeper we go into convent life, the closer we get to understanding exactly how and why a woman could end up in a place like that. So what was actually waiting for Elena once that door closed behind her? The convent of Sant'Anna sat in the Castello district of Venice, and inside, life followed a structure as rigid as a prison's, just with different uniforms. The day began before sunrise, bells, prayer,
more prayer. The divine office was recited multiple times a day, every day, for the rest of a nun's life, whether she believed a single word of it or not. But here's what most people don't realize. Not every woman in the convent was equal. If your family was wealthy, you might have your own private cell, small but yours. You might be permitted books, even in some cases a degree of education that women outside the walls were never allowed to even touch. If your family was poor, you became what was called a conversa, a servant nun. You scrubbed floors, you served meals, you lived in communal dormitories with no privacy and no possessions. The convent replicated almost perfectly the class system of the world outside it, except now there was no door back out. For Elena, something unexpected happened. Because she couldn't marry, and because her family had essentially discarded her, no one was paying close attention to what she did with her time. So she read. She taught herself Latin. She devoured Dante, Tasso, Machiavelli, the great Roman writers, texts that most women of her era, locked outside convent walls in ordinary households, would never be permitted to even touch. The convent had taken her freedom, but by accident it had given her something else: time and the tools to use it. In 1620, at 16 years old, Elena took her first vows. She was given a new name, Arcangela. It means archangel, a name of power, of divine messengers. She had no idea yet, but it was about to become exactly that.
Now, here's where the story takes a turn that most retellings skip entirely. Convents weren't only repositories for the unwanted. For Venice's elite, they served another purpose, one that had almost nothing to do with religion. During carnival season, the canals of Venice filled with masked figures, music and noise, and convent parlors, the rooms where nuns could receive visitors from behind a grill, became something else entirely. Wealthy young noblewomen who'd been placed in convents, sometimes the very same women forced there against their will, would dress in silk gowns under their habits. Young men in masks would arrive at the convent gates. Conversations happened. Letters were exchanged, sometimes far more than letters. The church's solution to too many unmarried women had created, in some convents, an entirely parallel social world, one where the rules the church claimed to enforce were quietly, constantly broken. But Arcangela's convent, St. Anna, wasn't like this. The Benedictine order there was stricter, more isolated. And as the years passed, 1623 when she took her final vows, 1629 when she was fully consecrated, Arcangela watched something happen to the women around her. Some adapted, some found peace, or at least the appearance of it, but others didn't. There are convent records, fragments, references in letters describing women who simply stopped speaking, who stayed in their cells for years, who, by the time they died, had been absent from convent life so long that younger nuns didn't remember their faces. The church called this piety, devotion, a retreat into prayer. But what if it wasn't devotion at all? What if it was something closer to what we'd recognize today in women who had been buried alive, slowly, inside their own minds? And in some convents, buried alive wasn't just a metaphor. Church records and later building restorations would occasionally turn up something the church never wanted found: sealed chambers built into convent walls just large enough for a single person, a punishment reserved for nuns accused of breaking their vows. Sealed in, given bread, water, and the words "Vade in pace," go in peace, and then
left. Is that what happened to the woman behind the wall from the start of this video? We don't know for certain, but the practice was real, documented in convents from Italy to Scotland, and it raises a question that should sit uncomfortably with you for the rest of this video. If a woman disappeared inside a convent walls, quietly, with no explanation, no body ever found, who exactly would have come looking for her? For decades, from 1629 until the early 1640s, Arcangela Tarabotti did what was expected of her, outwardly at least. But inside her cell, by candlelight, she was writing something that no one inside Sant'Anna knew existed. She called it paternal tyranny. The title alone was an act of defiance. In an era when women writing about politics or religion was almost unthinkable, Arcangela was writing a direct accusation aimed not at strangers, but at fathers, at men like her own father, at the entire system that had taken 11-year-old girls and sealed them behind walls for the rest of their lives. Listen to the world she was describing. She called what happened to women like her a sacrifice. Girls handed over so that their sisters could have bigger dowries, so that family fortunes could stay intact. She compared the men who did this to followers of darkness, men who searched their own households for the most vulnerable child and offered her up. This wasn't quiet grief. This was rage, written down, hidden, waiting. But here's the mini mystery. How did a woman locked inside a convent for her entire adult life, with no formal education, under constant religious supervision, manage to write some of the most radical feminist literature of the 17th century? The answer involves a man named Giovan Francesco Loredan, a powerful Venetian politician with his own reasons to be hostile toward Rome. And it involves Venice itself, a city that, unlike almost anywhere else in Catholic Europe, allowed printing presses to operate with a strange kind of freedom. Arcangela had found, without ever leaving her cell, a crack in the wall.
In 1643, something happened that should have been impossible. A book was published in Venice. Its title, Monastic Hell, though tellingly, the published version softened this to Monastic Paradise, describing nuns who supposedly chose convent life freely and found bliss there. Officially, that was the book that reached print, but the manuscript Arcangela had actually written, the one that called convents a sewer of filth and despair, the one that accused fathers of committing crimes against their own daughters. That version existed too, and it terrified people. Why would a description of convent life be considered dangerous enough to suppress? Because if Arcangela was right, if convents across Italy were filled not with women who'd found God, but with women who'd been discarded by their families, then an entire economic and social system, one that the church profited from directly, was built on a lie. Every dowry a convent collected, every donation a family paid to have an unwanted daughter accepted, every wealthy family that protected its fortune by sacrificing one daughter so others could marry well, all of it depended on nobody asking the question Arcangela was asking out loud. Did these women actually choose this? Arcangela never left Sant'Anna, not once in 37 years. She died there in 1652, having spent her entire adult life inside the same walls she'd been carried through as an 11-year-old girl. But her writings survived, copied, passed quietly between readers, referenced for centuries after her death. And remember the women from chapter 3, the ones who simply stopped speaking, who faded from convent records, forgotten even by the women who lived beside them? Arcangela wrote about them too. She gave them, for the first time, a name for what had happened to them. Not piety, not devotion, paternal tyranny. So let's go back to that wall, the sealed chamber, the skeleton with the rosary still in her hands. We still don't know her name. We may never know it. But after everything you've just heard, you now know exactly how a woman could end up there, and exactly why no one ever came looking for her. For 3.5 centuries, what happened behind doors like Sant'Anna's was almost completely hidden from history. Not because no one knew, but because the women who knew were never
never given away to be heard. Wealthy families across Europe used convents as a tool, a place to send the daughter whose dowry they couldn't afford, the daughter whose body didn't meet the standards of the marriage market, the daughter who was, in the coldest possible terms, surplus. And once that door closed, in the eyes of the outside world, that woman simply ceased to exist. No husband, no children, no name in any family record beyond a single line entered the convent. If that woman later broke a rule, spoke to the wrong person, was accused of the wrong thing, and sealed inside a wall as punishment, who would ever question it? Her family had already, on paper, let her go. The convent could write whatever explanation it wanted, and outside those walls, no one was checking. Here is the gut punch. Arcangela Tarabotti wasn't an exception. She was the rule, except that she wrote it down. For every Arcangela whose words survived, there were hundreds, maybe thousands of women across Italy, across Catholic Europe, who lived and died behind convent walls with no voice at all. Women whose entire existence was reduced to a financial transaction between their father and an institution. The convent that was supposed to be a bride of Christ's sacred home was, for so many of these women, simply a place built to make them disappear. And the most chilling part, it worked. For centuries, it worked. These women were forgotten until fragments of paper hidden in archives started speaking for them again, long after they were gone. The wall came down, the rosary was still in her hands, and for the first time in hundreds of years, someone finally looked. What happened inside Santa Anna wasn't really about religion at all. It was about power. Who has it? Who doesn't? And what happens to the people who become inconvenient to those who do? For Arcangela Tarabotti, the convent took everything. Her freedom, her choices, her future. But it couldn't take the one thing she had left, her voice. And centuries later, that voice is the only reason we're telling this story at all. But Venice wasn't the only place where the powerful built walls to make people disappear. Half a world away, inside the Ottoman Empire, an entirely different kind of prison existed, not for unwanted daughters, but for the empire's own princes, men who were heirs to the throne, locked away for decades in a single chamber, emerging, if they emerged at all, broken by the very isolation meant to keep them safe. That's the story we're telling next, the Ottoman Cage. Subscribe now, because what happened inside that room is something even the sultans themselves were afraid to talk about. Some doors are built to keep people out. Others are built to make sure no one ever finds out what's inside.